Mike had always been the kind of guy who didn't believe in the supernatural. Growing up in the small, quiet town of Grady's Creek, Montana, he'd heard every urban legend and ghost story there was, from strange lights in the woods to the supposed haunted house at the edge of town. He'd laughed them off, every single one of them. After all, how could any of that be true when life was as mundane as it was? His days were spent filming indie projects, documentaries about local bands, promotional videos for the occasional tourist attraction. Nothing exciting ever happened in Grady's Creek, but tonight, something felt different. The town was as it had always been, tucked away in the remote wilderness, with its lonely gas stations and empty streets after dark. It was isolated, quiet, too quiet sometimes, but it had a certain charm that Mike had grown used to. On nights like this, when the wind howled through the trees and the moon hung low, bathing the fields in pale light, the place could almost feel haunted. Almost. Mike sat on his porch, camera by his side, nursing a beer as the shadows lengthened across the empty fields that stretched beyond his backyard. His mind wandered back to the last project he and his friends had worked on. A bizarre music video they shot out in the abandoned farmlands on the edge of town. Lucas had insisted on capturing the eerie atmosphere out there, the long stretches of untamed land that seemed to stretch forever, untouched by time. Mike had thought it was overkill, but Jenna loved the idea. She always had a taste for the dramatic, for the stories that felt off. Jenna, Lucas, Derek, his crew. More than that, his friends. They were a strange group, bound together by their shared love of film and the small-town boredom that seemed to push them into weird projects just to pass the time. Jenna was the one with the wild ideas, always chasing after some new mystery or urban legend to film, while Lucas handled sound and Derek mostly provided sarcastic commentary and rolled his eyes at Jenna's latest fascination with the paranormal. Tonight, though, something about the town's stillness seemed to cling to Mike. Maybe it was the wind, or the distant sound of something rustling in the fields. But he felt uneasy. For the first time in a long while, the stories of Grady's Creek seemed to creep up on him, gnawing at the back of his mind. He hadn't seen Rachel in weeks. She was one of Jenna's friends, a free spirit, always up for an adventure. Mike had worked with her on a couple of shoots, but she had been different lately, more distracted, more distant. Jenna had mentioned she was going through something, but no one really knew what. The last time Jenna saw her was when Rachel had decided to look into one of the town's old legends, the Crucifixion. A chill ran down Mike's spine, but he shook it off. The Crucifixion was just another one of those small-town stories, passed down from generation to generation. Supposedly, somewhere out in the fields, there was a spot where strange things happened, dark things. The rumor went that every now and then, a figure would appear, nailed to a cross in the middle of nowhere. The person, if it was a person, would be there all night, and by morning they'd be gone without a trace. No one had ever captured it on film. No one ever came back with proof. But the story lingered, like all the others. And Rachel had gone looking for it. Mike didn't want to think about it, but as the wind whipped through the trees, he couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, this time the story was more than a myth. His phone buzzed on the armrest, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Jenna. "Mike, you up?" Her text read. He stared at the screen for a moment, the uneasy feeling still sitting heavy in his gut. "Yeah, what's up?" He typed back. Her response came quickly. "Meet me at the Old Coyote. We need to talk about Rachel." Mike frowned. Jenna had been worried about Rachel ever since she stopped answering calls. But this felt different. Something serious was going on. When Mike arrived at the Old Coyote Saloon, the usual crowd had already thinned out. A few locals sat at the bar, nursing drinks, but the place had its usual small-town quiet. He spotted Jenna at a booth near the back, her eyes flicking nervously toward the door, as if she were expecting someone, or something. "What's going on?" Mike asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "What's this about Rachel?" Jenna didn't answer right away. She stared down at the table, chewing on her bottom lip, her fingers tapping anxiously on the wood. After a few moments, she pulled her phone out and slid it across to Mike. "Look at this," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Mike frowned, picking up the phone. On the screen was a video, grainy and shaky, as if someone had filmed it from a distance, hiding behind something. The image was hard to make out at first, just a dark shape in the middle of a field, lit by the dim glow of moonlight. But then he saw it. A figure, hunched and motionless, arms stretched out like they were pinned to something, like they were nailed to a cross. Mike blinked, pulling the phone closer. He could hear the sound of the wind on the recording, the faint rustling of grass, and then something else. A low, barely audible hum, almost like a voice, but distorted. The figure didn't move, but there was something about it that made Mike's skin crawl. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jenna leaned in, her eyes wide, her voice shaking. "Rachel sent it to me, the night she disappeared." For a long moment, Mike didn't say anything. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of something dark and unknown settling over him. He didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or any of the weird crap Jenna was always talking about. But this felt real. "We need to find her," Jenna said, her voice firm, though Mike could hear the fear creeping in. "You and we need to go out there." Mike stared at the screen again, the figure still hauntingly still, pinned against the night sky like a shadow from another world. Everything in him screamed to ignore it, to leave it alone, to pretend this was just another one of those stupid stories that got out of hand. But something deep inside him, something primal and cold, wouldn't let go. He knew they were going to go out there. They had to. Mike nodded, his voice tight. "Let's do it." As they left the bar and stepped into the cold, silent night, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far beyond their understanding. The wind howled louder now, and in the distance, he could swear he saw something move in the fields, something waiting for them. Mike didn't sleep that night. After leaving the old coyote with Jenna, they drove straight to Lucas's place, the wind howling against the car as they sped through the empty streets. Grady's Creek was even more unsettling after dark. The long, desolate roads seemed to stretch on forever, and the moon, hidden behind thick clouds, cast an eerie glow across the town. Mike's mind raced with possibilities, his heart still pounding from the video Jenna had shown him. He kept replaying it in his head, the figure nailed to the cross, the strange sound in the background, the fact that Rachel had sent it the night she vanished. What the hell had she found out there? When they arrived at Lucas's, the house was lit up, music faintly playing from inside. Lucas was always up late, working on sound mixes or editing footage, and tonight was no different. Jenna didn't even bother knocking. She pushed the door open and stormed in, her face pale and tense. "Lucas, we need to talk now." Lucas looked up from his computer, eyebrows raised. He was wearing headphones, one hand still on the keyboard, clearly in the middle of editing something. His confusion quickly turned to concern when he saw Jenna's expression. "What the hell happened?" Mike shut the door behind them, the chill from outside lingering in the air. Jenna didn't waste time. She pulled out her phone, replaying the video. As the footage flickered to life, to grow colder, the music stopped. The wind rattling the windows. Lucas leaned in, eyes narrowing as he watched the shaky video. His usual laid-back demeanor evaporated as the figure on the cross came into view. He glanced at our screener. "Where did you get this?" "Rachel sent it to me," Jenna said, her voice tight, "the night she disappeared." Lucas froze, staring at the phone for a long moment before finally speaking. This can't be real. I mean, it's gotta be some kind of prank, right? There's no way." "It's real," Jenna interrupted, her voice firm. "She went out there to find the Crucifixion. You remember that stupid legend everyone talks about? The thing she wouldn't shut up about for weeks." Lucas rubbed his face, suddenly looking more tired than ever. "Yeah, I remember. But you're not seriously suggesting we go out there, right?" Mike, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "We have to." Lucas stared at him, blinking in disbelief. "Have to? Mike, this is insane. We don't know what's out there. That video could be anything. Hell, it could have been staged for all we know. Why the hell would we go out there in the middle of the night?" "Because Rachel's missing," Mike said, his voice low but steady. "And if there's even a chance she's out there, we need to find her." The room fell silent. Lucas looked between Mike and Jenna, clearly torn. He wanted to argue, to find some rational explanation that didn't involve chasing after urban legends in the dead of night. But the worry in Jenna's eyes, the tension in Mike's voice, it was enough to convince him that something wasn't right. "Fine," Lucas sighed, standing up and grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. "But if we find out this is just some sick prank, I'm killing both of you." Jenna managed a weak smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We won't be the ones you need to worry about." They picked up Derek on the way out of town. He was reluctant, as usual, making sarcastic remarks about how they were all going to end up on some missing persons list by morning. But even he couldn't ignore the seriousness in their voices, the undercurrent of fear that pulsed through the car as they drove deeper into the fields. The drive out to the abandoned farmlands was quiet, aside from the occasional hum of static on the radio. The signal cut out the farther they went, leaving only the sounds of the car's engine and the wind howling through the cracked windows. Mike kept his eyes on the road, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. He tried to push down the growing sense of dread that gnawed at him, but it wasn't easy. The field stretched out before them like a black ocean, the tall grass swaying in the wind, casting strange, shifting shadows in the moonlight. The air felt heavier out here, thicker. As they neared the old farm where Rachel had last been seen, Mike felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something was wrong. He could feel it. They parked the car just off the dirt road, the headlights barely illuminating the path ahead. Beyond the fence line was the abandoned farmhouse, its silhouette barely visible against the dark sky. It had been empty for years, a relic of a time long gone, but there were still signs of life, or at least of recent activity. The gate was slightly ajar, the grass trampled in places where someone had clearly been walking. Jenna was the first to get out of the car, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she scanned the area. Lucas followed, holding a camera, ready to film anything they might find. Derek grumbled something under his breath but stayed close, hands shoved deep into his pockets as he glanced around nervously. Mike lingered for a moment, staring at the farmhouse. His chest tightened, the weight of the night pressing down on him. He took a deep breath, grabbed his own flashlight, and stepped out into the cold. "Let's make this quick," he muttered, joining the others. They approached the gate cautiously, the wind picking up, whistling through the cracks in the wood. The grass rustled around them, and for a moment, it almost sounded like whispers. Mike shook the thought from his head, focusing on the task at hand. They needed to find Rachel, or at least some clue as to what had happened to her. The path to the farmhouse was overgrown, weeds choking what had once been a driveway. The windows were dark, broken in some places, and the roof sagged dangerously. It didn't look like anyone had been here in decades, yet the signs of recent activity were undeniable. The door was cracked open, hanging loosely on its hinges. "Rachel came here?" Derek asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jenna nodded, her face set in a grim expression. "This is where she said she'd be. If she found something, it's gotta be inside." Mike glanced at Lucas, who was already filming, the red light on his camera cutting through the darkness. They exchanged a silent look before stepping forward, pushing the door open with a loud creak. The interior of the farmhouse was even worse than the outside. Dilapidated walls, rotten floorboards, and the unmistakable stench of decay. It was like stepping into a tomb, forgotten and untouched for years. Dust swirled in the air as they entered, their footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. They spread out, searching for any sign of Rachel. Jenna headed upstairs, her flashlight bouncing off the peeling wallpaper as she moved from room to room. Lucas stayed close to Mike, the camera whirring softly as he filmed every inch of the place. Derek, however, lingered by the door, clearly wanting to be anywhere but here. Mike's flashlight flickered as he moved deeper into the house, illuminating faded photographs on the walls, remnants of a family long gone. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, any sign that Rachel had been here, any clue that could lead them to her. But the house seemed empty, devoid of anything but the memories of what once was. As he turned a corner, his flashlight caught something, a glint of metal in the corner of the room. He stepped closer, kneeling down to get a better look. It was a small rusted key half buried in the dust. Mike's heart skipped a beat. Why would there be a key here, in the middle of an empty room? He picked it up, holding it to the light. There was something carved into the metal, a symbol, faint but unmistakable. It looked like a cross. but not a normal one. The arms of the cross were jagged, twisted, almost wrong. Mike's stomach turned. He didn't know what the symbol meant, but it wasn't good. "Guys," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty house. "I think I found something." Lucas and Jenna appeared at his side a moment later, their flashlights sweeping the room. Lucas filmed the key, zooming in on the strange symbol. "What the hell is that?" Jenna asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," Mike said, pocketing the key, "but I don't think it's random." Before anyone could say anything else, there was a sound, soft at first, but growing louder, a low, almost rhythmic thumping, like footsteps. They all froze, the hair on the back of Mike's neck standing on end. "Did you hear that?" Derek's voice cut through the silence from the doorway. Jenna nodded slowly. The sound was coming from upstairs, where Jenna had just been. They exchanged glances, fear creeping into their expressions. Mike's heart raced as the sound grew louder, the thumping becoming more erratic, like something or someone was moving through the house. The floorboards creaked above them, the sound of shuffling feet echoing down the stairs. Without a word, they followed the noise, moving cautiously up the narrow staircase, each step heavier than the last. The air grew colder the higher they went, the shadows thickening around them. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before them, dark and silent, save for the soft creaking of the floorboards under their feet. Mike's flashlight flickered, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the walls as they approached the end of the hall. There, at the very last door, the noise stopped. Jenna reached out, her hand trembling as she grasped the doorknob. She hesitated for a moment, looking back at the others. Lucas had the camera trained on the door, his breath shallow, eyes wide with anticipation. Mike nodded, urging her to open it. With a deep breath, Jenna twisted the knob and pushed the door open. The room was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no signs of life, just 4 bare walls and a dusty floor. The window at the far end of the room was cracked, letting in a thin beam of moonlight that illuminated the space in a ghostly glow. But there was nothing here. No sign of Rachel, no sign of anything. Jenna let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping in relief and confusion. "What the hell?" Mike stepped into the room, his flashlight sweeping the corners, but there was nothing. He could still hear the sound, the rhythmic thumping echoing in his head, but it was gone now, replaced by an eerie silence that made his skin crawl. "Maybe we're hearing things," Lucas muttered, lowering the camera. "This place is messing with us." But Mike wasn't so sure. There was something wrong here, something they couldn't see, but it was watching them. He could feel it. As they turned to leave, Mike's eyes caught something out of the corner of the room, something small, barely visible in the shadowy corner. He stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. There, scrawled into the floorboards, was another symbol, the same jagged cross he had seen on the key. A sudden crash echoed from downstairs. Everyone jumped, spinning around to face the door. The sound reverberated through the house, like something heavy had been knocked over. Mike's breath caught in his throat as the reality of the situation set in. They weren't alone. The crash reverberated through the house, shaking the walls and sending a shockwave of fear through the group. For a moment, no one moved. Mike felt his breath catch in his throat as he stared at the doorway, heart pounding in his chest. Whatever was down there, whatever had made that sound, it wasn't just the wind. It wasn't the old farmhouse settling under the weight of time. Something, or someone, was downstairs. Jenna was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell was that?" No one answered. Mike's mind raced, his grip tightening on the flashlight. The air in the room felt suffocating, thick with tension and something else, something darker. The jagged cross carved into the floor seemed to pulse with a cold, malevolent energy, as if it were alive, watching them. He could almost hear the faint hum again, the same strange sound from the video Rachel had sent. Lucas took a step back, his camera still rolling, though his hands were shaking. "We should go, now." But Mike wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. There was something they were missing, something they hadn't seen. The farmhouse, the symbols, the strange noises. It was all connected to Rachel's disappearance. He knew it in his gut. "Wait," he said, his voice firm. "We can't leave yet." Derek shot him a look, incredulous. "What do you mean we can't leave? You heard that, Mike. Something's down there." "I know," Mike said, his eyes scanning the room again. "But we haven't found Rachel. Not yet. There's something in this house, something we're not seeing, and I think it's tied to whatever happened to her." Jenna glanced at the door, her face pale. "Mike, what if she's not here anymore?" Mike didn't want to think about that. He couldn't. He had to believe Rachel was still alive, that they could save her before it was too late. But the growing sense of dread in his chest made it harder and harder to hold on to that hope. Another noise echoed through the house, this time softer, like the creak of a floorboard under slow, deliberate footsteps. Whatever was downstairs was moving. Closer. Mike turned toward the door. "We have to go down there." Lucas swore under his breath, lowering the camera for a moment. "Are you out of your mind? We should be getting the hell out of here, not going deeper into this freak show." But Mike wasn't listening. He stepped forward, Jenna following close behind, her flashlight casting long shadows across the walls. Derek hesitated, clearly torn between his fear and his loyalty to the group. But eventually, he fell in line, muttering something about how this was the dumbest idea they'd ever had. The stairs creaked beneath their weight as they descended, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air grew colder the farther down they went, the shadows twisting around them as if they had a mind of their own. Mike kept his eyes forward, trying to push past the growing sense of wrongness that clung to him like a second skin. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before them, empty and silent. The crash had come from somewhere deeper in the house, from a room they hadn't explored yet. Mike's flashlight flickered as he led the way, the beam cutting through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. Then, they saw it. At the far end of the hallway, partially obscured by shadow, was a door. It was slightly ajar. The wood splintered and cracked, as if someone or something had forced it open. Mike's heart raced as he approached, his mind screaming at him to turn back, to run. But his legs carried him forward, drawn by a force he couldn't explain. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a room unlike any other in the house. The walls were covered in symbols, jagged crosses, spirals, and shapes that made Mike's eyes hurt to look at them. In the center of the room was a large wooden cross, the wood old and splintered, but unmistakably the same as the one from Rachel's video. Chains hung from the arms of the cross, rusted and stained with something dark, something Mike didn't want to think about. But it was what was on the floor that made his blood run cold. Rachel. She was lying on her side, her body curled into a fetal position, her hair matted and tangled. Her clothes were torn, dirty, and there were marks on her wrists and ankles, bruises like she'd been bound. Mike's breath caught in his throat as he knelt beside her, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "Rachel?" His voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. She didn't move. Jenna rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside Mike, her hands trembling as she reached for Rachel's face. "Oh my God, Rachel, please." For a moment, there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just the oppressive silence of the room closing in around them. Then, slowly, Rachel stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and wide with terror. She gasped, her body trembling as she tried to sit up. But Jenna held her down, whispering soothing words that seemed to do little to calm her. Mike's heart pounded in his chest as he looked around the room, trying to make sense of what had happened. The symbols, the cross, the chains, this was where the ritual had taken place. The crucifixion, and Rachel had been the victim. But why? And who had done this to her? Rachel's eyes locked onto Mike's, her voice hoarse and broken. "They're still here." Before Mike could ask what she meant, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway behind them. Slow, deliberate, approaching. Derek turned, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Guys, I think we need to move, now." Mike's blood ran cold. Whoever had taken Rachel, whoever had done this to her, they were coming, and they weren't finished. "Get her up," Mike said, his voice tight with fear. "We need to get out of here." Lucas dropped the camera, rushing to help Jenna lift Rachel to her feet. Rachel winced, her legs weak, but she managed to stand, leaning heavily on Jenna as they moved toward the door. Mike stayed close, his eyes darting between the hallway and the symbols on the walls, his mind racing to understand what they were up against. They had almost reached the stairs when the footsteps stopped. The hallway behind them was dark, the shadows stretching impossibly long. Mike's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shapes on the walls as he turned to face whatever was coming. And then, they saw it. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway, its face obscured by a grotesque mask. The mask was a twisted parody of a human face, its smile unnaturally wide, the eyes hollow and empty. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching them. Mike's heart pounded in his ears as he took a step back, his body screaming at him to run, but his legs felt like they were made of lead, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. The figure tilted its head, the smile on the mask somehow growing wider, more menacing. Then, it stepped forward. "Go!" Mike shouted, pushing Jenna and Lucas toward the stairs. "Get her out of here!" They didn't need to be told twice. Jenna and Lucas scrambled up the stairs, half carrying Rachel between them. Derek was right behind them, his eyes wide with panic as he glanced back at Mike. Mike turned to follow, but as he reached the bottom of the stairs, something cold and sharp closed around his ankle. He looked down, his heart stopping in his chest. A hand, pale, twisted, and skeletal, was gripping his leg, its fingers digging into his skin with inhuman strength. The figure from the hallway was gone, but its presence lingered, like a shadow that refused to fade. Mike kicked at the hand, panic surging through him as he tried to pull free, but the grip tightened, dragging him back toward the dark. "Mike!" Jenna's voice echoed from the top of the stairs, but he couldn't answer. His breath was coming in short, ragged gasps as the hand pulled him closer to the doorway, to the room where the symbols writhed on the walls like living things. He was going to die here. But then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the hand released him. Mike stumbled back, his heart racing as he scrambled to his feet, his mind reeling from what had just happened. He didn't stop to think. He turned and ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time, his flashlight bouncing wildly in his hand. When he reached the top, Jenna was waiting for him, her face pale and drawn. What the hell happened? "I don't know," Mike gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "But we need to get out of here. Now." They didn't argue. Together, they hurried down the hallway, Rachel leaning heavily on Jenna as they made their way to the front door. The wind had picked up outside, howling through the cracks in the walls, rattling the windows. But as they reached the front door, Mike's heart sank. The door wouldn't budge. He threw his weight against it, his shoulder slamming into the wood, but it was as if the house itself was holding them in. The wind outside grew louder, more violent, as if the very air was screaming at them to leave. But there was no way out. Mike turned to the others, his heart pounding in his chest. "We're trapped." And then, from behind them, the footsteps started again. Slow, deliberate, closer.